Hello, everybody. This is Dr. Annette Feravich with Healthy Mind, Body, Spirit. And as you know, you can find me on the internet at www.healthymindbodyspirit.net. And today, thank you for joining me. And as you know, today, usually I am here at 4:30 on Sunday evenings. But today is Wednesday, and it's Wednesday evening. I'd hoped to get here even earlier today and did not. But actually just getting a whole bunch of stuff done for my job that you know. I am a university instructor, special lecturer at a local university here in the Detroit metropolitan area that is neither affiliated with or endorses anything that I do here, but it does keep me very busy, and all of that stuff and a few extra things kept me busy and kept me from getting on here on Sunday. But I did want to keep us up to date so I wasn't behind on the following Sunday. And so let's see what we are here to talk about today. All right. So the very first thing that I want to talk to you about is I am going to give you Annette's 2-minute health corner. That's what I'm going to talk about. So when I start these videos, one of the things that I really plan on doing is also giving you some health updates that have to do with what I'm going through, because I think it's important for me to relate the kinds of things that I experience, as well as I hear about through your experiences, and also then combine all that with what I read about in the peer-reviewed literature that's out there. And that's something we're going to highlight. And so today I want to start with a little 2-minute segment. And you can see that the 2-minute segment is going to be on Epstein virus is what it's going to be on. And again, I want to do this little 2-minute thing because it is something that I am going through. And so I just want to talk to you just a little bit about it. And so this is 2 minutes. It's going to be a short little video that I'm having at the beginning of this because we are healthy mind, body, spirit, right? And then also, it's going to be a little 2-minute video that I have just for those people who might be interested in Epstein virus. So let's go ahead and get started with that. All right. Okay, so for my 2-minute health corner today, I want to talk about the Epstein-Barr virus. And the idea here is that again, it's something that I've been experiencing. And what I've been experiencing, I want to talk to you a little bit about. I want to talk to you about what is it, whether or not you have it, what are the symptoms if you do, and then also take a look at what you can do about it. So let's go ahead and get started with that. So, Epstein-Barr virus, what is it? Well, what it is a consequence, an outcome of having mononucleosis. If you remember or know the symptoms of mononucleosis, it lasts for quite a while, and the main symptom is great fatigue and tiredness. Now, most people get mono, and therefore 90% of the population actually have Epstein virus. But the majority of individuals do not have chronic Epstein virus. Chronic Epstein virus is where we see symptoms flare up long beyond the experiences of mononucleosis. I happen to have chronic Epstein virus. So let's take a look a little bit more closely at it. So what we know is it's an outcome of mononucleosis. About 90% of individuals have it. The symptoms are that we have great fatigue, even when you have it later on in life. We know that, let me look at all my notes over here. We know that it is difficult for individuals to detect. And so what you want to do is you want to begin to think about and track some of the symptoms that you may have. If you feel fatigued and tired, and in particular, if you notice that that tiredness is at around the same time of the month. Now, this can be associated with women's menstrual cycle, for example, but it can also be associated with things like the moon. Why? Because our cycles at times, depending on our area in life or where we are in life, can also mimic the moon cycle. So what I'm saying here is to detect it, what you want to do is you want to kind of keep track of when you feel extremely fatigued. And then what can you do about it? Well, you want to get your blood tested and talk to your doctor about the idea that you may have this and that you've heard a little bit about it. In particular, again, it is because you feel extremely fatigued on a regular basis. Also note that individuals can also feel extremely fatigued, in particular at the change of seasons. So this past March is when I noticed that mine flared up again, and in particular it would have flared up particularly severe this time for me. And the reason why I would suggest is because I have gone through a lot of stress. So at this time, it was a year ago that my husband passed. And then in September, I also had my son's wedding that I also put on. And then I've been teaching and having a certain teaching load, as well as trying to get all of my finances in place as well. So it's been an extremely stressful time. And so as far as the yearly cycle goes, you want to look for extreme tiredness in March and extreme tiredness in October. You also want to take a look at the cycles again of the moon that go along with this. But as far as getting some scientific data behind it, it's really hard to detect. So talk to your doctor about it. And again, you might want to see somebody who is a homeopath or a naturopath, right? Or some kind of somebody who endorses some kind of alternative medical treatment. And the reason why is because most doctors really don't know a lot about this. So if you feel that you have this, what can you do about it? So again, get blood tests from your doctor, number one, and try and have this diagnosed. Number two, try and record in particular when you feel the major symptom, which is fatigue. And then number three, prepare yourself with vitamins. And this is really important. The reason why you want to prepare yourself with vitamins is because, that's Lucy back there if you can hear her. The reason why you want to prepare yourself with vitamins is because as a virus, your vitamins are depleted. So the things that I really beef up on are Nutriferon, because Nutriferon has interferon, and interferon boosts our immune system. And then what I do is I make sure that I'm taking my vitalizer. And I might beef up on some of those things that are in my vitalizer as well. There we go, in my vitalizer. And I might beef up on some of those things in my vitalizer as well. There are 2 omega-3s. Omega-3s are really good for individuals who have Epstein-Barr, I have found. They're really good for me. One of the reasons why is because Epstein-Barr may be associated with parasites, and parasites really do not like high levels of omega-3. And this makes sense because when it gets in your gut, it literally is an oil, right? It's an oil. And so, yeah, parasites don't like that. Beef up on your multivitamin. There are 2 multivitamins here as well. And then the last one here is a boost on your B and your C. If you have Epstein virus, I would do a little bit higher dose on those things. And the reason why I would do a higher dose on those things is in particular your C. What your B does is your B helps you with your nervous system, your central nervous system. And your C helps you fight and also boosts up your immunity. So both of them are very important in helping fight, in particular, the tiredness that is associated with Epstein virus. The last one here is a probiotic. There we go. The last one here is a probiotic. And the probiotic also is important if Epstein virus is associated with parasites. Now, the thing here that I always like to bring out is that this is the problem with traditional medicine. And the problem with traditional medicine is that we don't know enough science behind some of those things that actually don't bring in a great profit, right? If everyone has Epstein virus, very few people have it chronically. They're not developing a vaccine for it, and they don't know any good or have a whole lot of really meaningful treatments out there for it. So the other thing about Epstein virus is this, is that what it does, or Epstein-Barr virus, is what it does is you can hear that it occurs very often in young people, and here you can get an Epstein-Barr rash. And Epstein-Barr is actually part of the herpes virus family. And so you can see those pictures there, the top picture showing the Epstein-Barr virus rash. And below that is where there is the herpes virus outbreak on the face. And so this herpes virus outbreak on the face, it's like a virus on the face. And so when it's chronic for me, that's what ends up happening. And so just a couple things. Be aware of the symptoms, because those facial symptoms are unique to Epstein-Barr, in that these are not pimples. They are rashes that can create pustules, and those pustules end up weeping. They don't end up popping like a pimple that is filled with bacteria. And so the thing that you also want to understand is that often when your face feels like it is breaking out, our very first go-to is going to be to a dermatologist. And the dermatologist, as they did with me, is likely going to prescribe a series of antibiotics. And this series of antibiotics promotes parasitic growth in the gut, because it kills all bacteria. And good bacteria is what keeps parasites away. So it is really this mixture of many things. But what we need to do is we need to keep our vitamins and minerals up in order to fight the fatigue, and it does. In addition, it also helps fight, it also helps fight some of this rashing condition that we end up getting because of the virus. And what I found is that I need to not dry my skin out with the things prescribed by a dermatologist, but what I need to do is I need to keep my skin very moist. And so I wash my face with a combination of coconut oil, vitamin E oil, tea tree oil, and then there's some zinc in there, and then there's a little bit of colloidal silver in there also, which is natural antibacterial agent. But then I make sure again that my face is moisturized, and the best way that I like to keep my face moisturized is by using this Youth Activation Serum. And this is really incredible stuff for my cheeks, and where I end up getting that very, very dry skin that then results in the pustules. And when they break open, they're like open sores and ulcers. And those can also get infected. So you want to make sure you keep your skin very clean. You want to make sure that you keep your skin very moist as well. I also use other youth products. I also use other Shaklee youth products as well. So that is Shaklee Youth Intense Moisturizer. And then I also use, or Intense Serum. And then I also use their moisturizer. Okay, all right. So that's what I wanted to tell you about Epstein-Barr virus. I think I've got everything. Let me just look at my list over here. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Okay, all right. So moving on. So what are we talking about today? So today we are talking about whether or not we should be considering a higher power. Now, this is part 3 in my series, A Healthy New You in 2022. This is part 3 in my series, A Healthy New You in 2022. And part 3 is all about a healthy spirit, right? So as we move along in our healthy spirit, let's take a look at what has been our agenda. So here's our agenda. We first introduced this new series on April 24th and kind of gave you an introduction as far as science goes. When we are talking about science, we want to introduce science relative to some of our spiritual understanding, right? So intellectual beliefs, senses, and intuition. We talked about that as we introduced our new series on April 24th. Then on May 1st, which was last Sunday, we were to begin our Beyond Science, Why Think About a Higher Power. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. Beyond Science, Why Consider a Higher Power. Part 3 of A Healthy New You in 2022, A Healthy Spirit. Okay. Now for today's agenda. What am I going to be talking about today? So first of all, as we already gotten through item number 1 on today's agenda, our 2-minute health corner, and our I should have put Epstein-Barr. And our focus was on Epstein-Barr virus. All right. And then what we're going to do is we're going to talk about now, as we move into our concepts more about what is spirituality. So what I'm trying to do for you is contrast, because again, I believe I am a scientist, and I'm trying to contrast then our belief about science and our knowledge about science, and how can we reconcile that with spirituality. So that really is the goal for today. Reconciling, that really is the goal for today. Reconciling our scientific mind with our quest for spirituality, for an understanding of those things that are beyond our senses. And so we're going to go into that. I always try and get started going into that a little bit ahead of schedule, and I don't want to do that. All right, so taking a look at then we're going to be moving into concepts of spirituality, starting with concepts of Greek philosophy on spirituality. Then we are going to move into this concept of culture versus universalism. And the reason why I'm going to be talking about that is because what we need to do is we need to kind of set a foundation or some groundwork for terminology so that we can understand, do we have a spirit for knowledge and science that is very concrete? Of course we do. But also, do we have a spirit for a spirit, right? Are we motivated, right, to move in certain directions? So, remember, we talked about this. So this is sort of this breath that we have, right? This breath, and we're gonna keep talking about that. So getting different concepts of the spirit is what we want to do, so that we're not only taking a look at this inside our own limited, narrow minds, which are very often biased, and they have to be narrow, right? They have to be narrow. They can't encompass all knowledge. You might know more to do, more or less, whether it's right or wrong. What I want that higher power to do is magic, right? In some ways. Now, I don't mean to be disrespectful to anyone's religion or anyone's belief. Remember that one of the things that I have always tried to do is sort of bridge that gap between no understanding of a higher power, which is why I'm not even giving God a name right now, right? I just want to call God a higher power, okay? Whatever that God might be for you, right? So, some people in Alcoholics Anonymous, some people in AA call it good, orderly direction. Good, orderly direction. But that's what we want to sort of contemplate. Why would there be a good, orderly direction? Why would there be? With so many species and so many living organisms, and all of these living organisms finding their own niche, how then can there be orderly direction, much less good orderly direction? All right? And so let's take a look at that, right? So trying to bridge the gap by having a better understanding of what is what is transformation? So let's take a look at that, because again, what do we really desire, right? And I called it magic a minute ago, and but what do we really desire? And transformation, what I desire to give up my addictions, right? In transformation, I desire to get along better with individuals from one form to another, to go between, because trans between, the word trans means between, right? So I'm going between forms, from one form to another form, right? And isn't that what we would like to do? Just simply have that occur. So what we need to do is we need to contemplate, is that possible? And in order to find out if it's possible, what we need to do is we need to study it scientifically. Again, over and over, the same thing is that when we have one narrative in health and science, we are not then studying those things that are not part of that same narrative. And I don't think that that's good, right? So that's why I am taking us into an area that I'm hoping will become second nature for us to study in our quest for real knowledge. Knowledge about the universe, about it all. Why would we have a barrier to some knowledge but not others? It seems utterly ridiculous. It seems primitive to me. It seems ignorant, is what it seems. Okay, all right, so continuing on with today's agenda. I'm going to leave it up there the way it is. Okay, and so then, again, I want to then show you examples of transformation. Is there a real transformation? Many of these ways that we see transformation, again, are not being. So on with our first agenda item. So Greek philosophy, and according to Greek philosophy, they talk about where is our spirit. And where our spirit is in our diaphragm. So, and in our diaphragm is where breathing exists. And so when we talked about spirit before in our first introductory episode, what we talked about was that the spirit is associated with, by definition, breath. And even from a Christian perspective, which gives you another definition, the Holy Spirit is also the breath of life, and also has been considered, amongst other things, not only the breath of life, but also the breath of life. And so we see, and from Greek philosophy, and actually even medicine comes from Hippocrates, who was who introduced medicine to Greek culture. And so that's where medicine began. And so when we take, even according to this, they took a look at, interestingly enough, had made interesting associations with, for example, blood and disease. So that's the first time that we began to look at disease as being a pathogen in our blood or in our fluids, in our humors is what they called them. And so what I'm saying here is that we don't dismiss, nor should we dismiss, and actually sort of dismissing some of our knowledge and ancient knowledge that we have really is guided by an arrogance, and also guided by an arrogance that suggests that science really is the end all and be all for knowledge. The scientific method may be, but science itself is not. And so we want to kind of distinguish between what people are calling science, and then as good scientists, what we always do is we determine whether or not that actually is using good scientific methodology. All right? Okay. So again, what we're looking at here is just some very ancient thought about spirit, and looking at well, the word I'm looking for is universalities. That's not the word I'm looking for. Commonalities. That's the word I'm looking for. And looking for commonalities. And so what we want to do is, in order to better understand spirituality, is to look for commonalities that we've seen across time and across culture. And what we call that then is, we call that taking a look at universals. When we find that something is a universal, what that does is it says to us that we can then begin to consider the biology of it. We can then begin to consider things like, is it innate? Is it a part of us? And a part of us might mean that it's a part of us because of our biology. A part of us might also mean that it has evolved in us over time for the good of humanity. Let's not say the good of the species. Let's say that it evolved in us over time for the good of humanity. All right? And so, again, when we're looking at something universal, we want to see if it has a staying power across time and across all culture. Let's take a look at cultural differences, right? So, if we see that individuals differ in something because of culture, then what we're saying is that likely is not something that is innate. It has not evolved across time. Spiritually speaking, what we say is that is something that then would not have been necessarily written on our hearts, right? From a Christian perspective, the Spirit lives within us, right? From a Jewish perspective, God had his law, and the law was written on our hearts, all right? But one way or another, what we're seeing from a spiritual perspective is that laws, morals, ethics, values, the differences between right and wrong are something internal. Now, as a scientist, what we want to find out is, well, then where did they come from, right? Where did they come from? So those are the things that we should be studying if we want to study things like values, for sure. And what a time to be studying values, don't you suggest, right? Don't you think? And I'm going to tell you that we are going in a direction of not studying values, and that the more that we embrace science to the exclusion of other ideas, the more we are limiting knowledge, and the more that we are the more that we're limiting knowledge. Let's stop right there, right? So so it's a narrow view. We are eliminating people from the conversation, which means that we're eliminating knowledge. And when we purposefully eliminate knowledge, that's just primitive, is what it is. It's primitive. Okay, so let's take a look at the differences here then. Let's take a look at the differences here then between culturalism, those things that change between places that we live, and also over time as well. Those things we say are learned, so they are not built inside of us. So as a psychologist, we say that those things are learned. That's the nurture aspect, right? So having this nature-nurture concept has always been beneficial for us in science and in psychology. That nature-nurture kind of approach to science has always been beneficial. Sorry, guys. Got to get the flowers in there. Okay, so now what I have here on this PowerPoint slide is I've got examples of culturalism versus universalism. So those things that some examples of things that vary by culture. So the very first one here in the picture on the left top side there is differences that we can see in culture relative to or related to personal space or social distancing, right? Sometimes people, even now, with all of these warnings and with all of our experiences of COVID, we see that we still have cultural differences. We can see that those cultural differences are learned, whether or not they have been learned because of COVID or whether or not they have been learned because of where we have been raised, right? Some of us give kisses on the cheeks, some of us simply shake hands, and some of us don't touch one another, we simply bow, right? So social distancing is an example of something that has been learned through our culture. Okay, another one we saw there at the bottom there was gesturing. And I'm not going to go through all the differences. You can pick up a social psych book and find out some of the differences, but there are many differences in gesturing where some gestures are in some cultures actually obscene and other gestures can mean a whole bunch of things. All right, so that gesturing demonstrates like a hi, hello, waving, or okay. Those gestures are based on the meaning of those gestures are based on culture. Okay, and then the picture that we have over there to the right on the bottom, This is demonstrating cultural differences that we see in public versus private selves. And if you take a look there at the center diagram that I have there for you, you can see what the graphic is representing at the top is how we relate to one another in Western culture. That's also known as an independent view of the self. And so you can see that we do not overlap very often in our description of who we are in Western or independent cultures. We like to think of ourselves as being separate from one another and unique. That I am independent and I make a unique road for myself that is very different than your road. You can see we are much less connected than the bottom representation of the interdependent view of the self, where this is more representative of how Eastern cultures view relationships. And you can see that there is an overlap there, right? And so when I see myself in Eastern culture, I also view my self relative to my relationships. And that's the reason why relationships are so important in Eastern cultures. For example, that's the reason why they look to and take care of the elderly in the culture, because they see the elderly as having wisdom that is being passed down to me, so that we have great overlap between you and me. Now, this is interesting as it relates to public and private selves, in that because I am so dependent in Eastern cultures on other people, I am more dependent on what other people think about me, and therefore culturally am more aware of and concerned with how I look in public. Interestingly enough, in Western cultures, because we are unique and we care more about our independent self as being different and separate than others, we care about more often what makes us tick, and that is more our private selves. And so we see differences here in culture versus concepts of that are universal, that we all share. And then also another concept to think about is if we all share this as human beings, does the animal world also share that, right? And so then we see real universalism, a real necessity, and that quality evolving in particular, what we care about, the human species. And so let's take a look at the universalism of spirituality, right? Okay. Now, I have this slide here in order to demonstrate or to talk about the concept of neuroplasticity. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this is because neuroplasticity has to do with culturalism. Neuroplasticity says that my brain changes because of the culture that is around me and the environment that is around me and that I've created. Okay? And so when we compare Eastern and Western brain activation in individuals, and we're just making generalizations, right? But here are studies that have been done. What we see is we see different activation depending on, in particular, relationships. So different activation when I recall things like my mother, or when I recall things that are qualities that would be qualities of my mother, like honesty, for example. Okay? So, when we see culturalism, when culturalism is involved, that is differences among individuals, among and between individuals, we say that's likely then not a biological trait. It is likely learned, and we should expect to see differences in brains and also other biology, by the way, other cellular development, by the way, as well. So, cultural differences bring about, we know, biological and neurological differences as well. Okay, all right. Everyone should know. Time to change a slide. I say okay. All right, let's take a look at this slide. Now what we're going to be taking a look at is we're going to look at some of the universalism that we have found relative to emotion, for example. And these are based on psychological science that's been done. So wonderful studies that have been done by Paul Ekman, for example, that have taken a look at universalism of facial expressions as they express emotions. Now think about that. What we have here is we have the pictures that Paul Ekman used in the 1960s in order to test whether or not we all interpreted emotional expressions the same. If emotional expression interpretation is the same across all cultures and across time, as we continue across time to test this using different pictures, you see the original pictures were done with Western images, right? Western emotional expressions. But then as Ekman began to test his theory over and over again in different populations and then in different cultures as well, what he ended up finding out is that facial expressions are very similar across culture. And so this then begins to give us an idea that emotions themselves, right? So, feelings of sadness, happiness, feelings of disgust, surprise, that these have a universal element to them, which means they're innate and they have a biological basis to them. I didn't have to learn that this is a smile expressing joy or happiness. It didn't have to be taught to me. So this is a really good example then of universalism, a concept, emotions. And remember, emotions to move are tied to our values. What do we need to move? We need spirit. What do we need to move? We need breath. So our emotions to move, to emote, to move. We move through our emotions, our values. What gets us to move? Our values get us to move. Okay, so what we begin to see is that values may have a universal element to it as well, right? All right, let's move on. Now what we see here is that there are some indications that we are able to see these expressions in animals as well, so primates. And when we look at primates here, non-human primates, when we are looking at them, can we tell what these monkeys are feeling? And what we found is that it appears that maybe we can, but again, we haven't really got a lot of scientific studies that actually have matched the correct emotion with an animal's face. Although we do have some suggestion that an animal's expression might be happiness. It's really, of course, a hard thing to study, isn't it? Because it can't be, when we see some silly picture of a dog smiling, we can't ask the dog, are you happy? So we can't double check the emotion that the animal is feeling. Now, we do have some tests that have been done with what we call mirror neurons. I'm going to talk a little bit about that a little bit later on, but tests with mirror neurons are suggesting that I may be able to tell what an animal is actually feeling neurologically, but again, it cannot be supported with the subjective label of happy, sad, whatever, right? Can't be supported with that. So, as far as whether or not we know that we can tell that we share the same expressions with animals, this still seems to be up in the air. There seems to be a lot of interpretation without a lot of necessarily evidence. Maybe we do. Seems likely that I can tell that Lucy is happy when she does certain things, but those things aren't exactly the same things that I do, right? I don't wag my tail, for example, when I'm happy, right? Or jump like Lucy does. All right, my Chihuahua. So, is the concept of a higher power universal? That's really what we want to examine. Because if this concept of a higher power is universal, then we can begin to support things like innate, evolved, biology, DNA, written in our hearts, spirit in our diaphragm, something that is physiological, that is connected to this universal concept, right? All right, so what is it? What is it that's been passed through time that is related to this universal concept? And again, the problem is that we have avoided this question. There are places, Discovery Institute actually is a place that is taking a look at the biological basis for intelligent design, all the way down to a cellular level. So intricately looking at this question. But because universities have basically excluded the question, looks like I'm losing some. We'll see. But basically, because the universities have excluded the question, we are not studying in a scientific, methodological way, whether or not they're actually methodological, there we go, way, whether or not we do have evidence for intelligent design. So stop dancing around the question and just let's put together some really good studies, because we can, right? Empirical design isn't difficult to follow just because you're asking a hard question, okay? I'm going to repeat that, okay? Science is not hard to follow. The scientific method is not hard to follow just because the question might be, okay? So the first place that I wanted to take a look at whether or not we have a universal concept of something that is spiritual is I wanted to take a look at it in Native American culture. All right, now I'm going to have to take just a second because I did not bring my cord over here and I am going to have to plug in. So hopefully this isn't a bad place to stop so you can take a chance to read, and I will be right back. Okay, I'm back. Well, I kind of floated in and out of there without closing my little thing, didn't I? Okay, so what I wanted to tell you a little bit of a background about Native American culture relative to spirit. So you can see that here is this story, which is called The Wolves Within. There's a couple other names for it as well. So an old Cherokee is teaching his grandson about life. A fight is going on inside me, he said to the boy. It is a terrible fight, and it is between two wolves. One is evil. He has anger, envy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego. The other is good. He is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. The same fight is going on inside you and inside every other person too. The grandson thought about it for a minute and then asked his grandfather, which wolf will win? The old Cherokee simply replied, the one you feed. Now, the reason why I love this is, of course, so many reasons. Just what a wonderful poem that I have there, or verse that. But what I really liked about this was what it reminded me of. So the very first thing that it reminded me of is it reminded me of Alcoholics Anonymous, what they call their shortcomings or their, oh my goodness gracious, I can't believe I just lost that whole thing. Hold on. Oh my gosh, can't believe that. It took me that forever to remember that. Character defects is what that poem reminded me of. So there are listed there many of the character defects that are listed also in Alcoholics Anonymous. So what we end up seeing is that those things that actually detract from the human spirit may be similar across cultures. Again, it's difficult to know because it's something that we haven't studied, but that's the way that we want to study. What are some of these universals? There's also a book that was narrated by Daniel Goleman that was also has got the Dalai Lama and other individuals, including Paul Ekman there, that talk about some of these same concepts that we have that are related to these character defects. And they include what they called destructive emotions. And so that's the name of the title. That's the title of the book by Daniel Goleman, Destructive Emotions, that again include these same kinds of evils as represented in this verse or these verses. And also the same kinds of things that are represented in Alcoholics Anonymous as well. So let's take a look at that then. So the second example that I have for across cultures that we see different commitments to or different examples of transformation. And we know that Alcoholics Anonymous endorse what they call the 12 steps. And I'm calling these 12 steps, they are steps to transformation. Why can they be called steps to transformation? Well, let's take a look at what those steps are, first of all, and why these are good examples of universal ideas of a higher power that lead to transformation. Okay, so here, first of all, when you go to an AA meeting, and in fact, in much of their literature and information on their coins, when you receive coins, have a lot to do with the Serenity Prayer. Some of the coins may often have the Serenity Prayer on them. And so the Serenity Prayer in all of the AA meetings open with the Serenity Prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So again, here you can see a commitment to a way of change, right? And not just a way of change, but also a way of understanding when change is necessary. That seems to be, when you look at this Serenity Prayer, outside the realm of the individual saying the prayer, right? Outside of the will of the individual saying the prayer, that I'm being, give me this gift, right? So asking God in this prayer for this gift. Not that I work for it, right? But asking for the gift. All right, so let's take a look also then at the 12 steps. And as we take a look at the 12 steps, let's take a look at also or contemplate how many of these 12 steps have to do with the concept of a higher power. All right, and so step number 1, I am powerless over, or we admitted we are it starts with we, not I. We admitted we are powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. And so now I also want you to think about these 12 steps as they may relate to maybe some other addiction that you have or some other dependency, because that's what addiction is. It's a dependency. So maybe you're codependent on another person, right? And you're powerless to that person. So a way to be able to have a greater understanding of the power of this transformation from Alcoholics Anonymous would be to take a look at how these steps or other literature that they have relates to me, right? So we admitted we are powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Is there something that's making your life unmanageable? Came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Step number 3, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. All right, so we have God not mentioned in number 1, but God mentioned in number 2 and number 3. Made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. And that also requires, morality also requires an understanding of God, or those kinds of, again, character defects is what they call them. Step number 5, admit it to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. God is mentioned again. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. God is mentioned again. Humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. God is mentioned again in number 7. Made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Made direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. Step number 10, continue to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. Step number 11, sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood him, praying only for the knowledge of his will for us and the power to carry that out. That is step number 11. Again, it mentions God. And then number 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, having had a spiritual awakening, that is, folks, transformation. We try to carry this message to alcoholics and to practice these principles in all our affairs. All right, so here you see a program that actually has great success. If you don't know about the program has been around since the 1930s, and psychologically speaking, even Carl Jung tried to get these individuals to leave their alcoholism, and he could not do it. And then Bill Wilson, that's why I didn't get it right, and a few others put the program together with these 12 steps that we see have brought people out of what medical doctors and psychologists could not bring them out of. And as we see here, a great reliance then on a higher power. All right, so moving on. Now let's take a look at, the last thing I want to take a look at related to Alcoholics Anonymous are these 12 promises. And so what we really see here with these 12 promises are real transformation. So if you follow these steps, and these steps aren't something that you are trying to will so much as you are watching as you step through them the creation of real transformation. So let's take a look at these 12 promises. Promise number 1, we are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness, and see how these relate to real transformation. Promise number 2, we will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. Isn't that a great transformation, to not feel so guilt-ridden or shamed about our past? Promise number 3, we will comprehend the word serenity. So right there in our promises, it's one of the things that, again, they repeat at every meeting, the Serenity Prayer. Promise 4, we will know peace. And this is a wonderful thing, because what we are promised as a spiritual Christian, for example, is we are promised peace. And so to see this being promised in different areas that are not related to organized religion, promising the same thing with a relationship with the higher power, this helps give evidence to the necessity of having a higher power or believing in a higher power. Promise number 5, no matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. And so what we're taking a look at here through AA is the idea that our sins cannot be so great that they cannot benefit other people, our stories, that they cannot be forgiven and consequently be a benefit to others. Promise number 6, that feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. What a wonderful promise. What a wonderful transformation, especially in a world that really values the underdog and values the concept of being a victim. how can I still get justice and not have to feel self-pity in order to do it, right? We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Promise number 8, self-seeking will slip away. That's a transformation. If I am typically self-absorbed, as we have seen for the last couple generations, known as the me generation, to have that self-seeking slip away, isn't that real transformation? Promise number 9, our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Transformation, our whole attitude, not part of our attitude. I won't be hanging on to something from the past. That's not what it's saying. I will acknowledge the past, but I will be able to let it go, right? Our whole attitude will change. Fear of people and economic insecurities will leave us. Isn't that the promise of organized religion as well? We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. And this again is demonstrating not a desire or a will for it, but a real change in form. Number 12, we will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves. Yeah, so those are the promises. And so when you take a look at those are just extraordinary examples of transformation and not suggestions of transformation. They are calling them promises. You follow the 12 steps, and this is a promise. And so this is what I want us to think about and look at. It seems that real transformation requires a belief in a process. And so let's take a closer look. Scientifically, we should be taking a closer look at what this process is, this necessary process to bring about those wonderful promises, that wonderful promise of transformation. Okay, now the third example that I said that I wanted to take, before I do that, I wanted to just give you a link to some really great AA videos. So remember, if you are stuck with any of those character defects that were mentioned in the poem, in the American Indian verse that we had there, the wolves inside. If you find that you have got any of those character defects that we talked about that are also addressed in AA meetings, you might want to check out some of these AA videos. Now remember, I'm calling them triggers, so they're called many different things, but if you find that you have character defects, if you find that you have triggers, all of us are really talking about the same kinds of things. And so some of these approaches are going to work for real transformation. Other approaches you want to look into. And I'm going to be talking about good therapy and good therapists as well. Not today, but another time, because we're already over an hour. But if you really want to get a jump on some of the real solid evidence-based components that help with transformation in AA, you can see it through those videos. So that link right there will take you to 25. And trust me, these people really are they're really comical because they really know how to take a look at their character defects and not fall apart by admitting that they exist, right? It doesn't take them under, it doesn't overwhelm them, it doesn't fill them with anxiety any longer. They will know peace. A promise. All right, and now I just want to take a quick look at a scientific way that we can or have taken a look at values. And again, values, this is more of a scientific way, but values are related to our Christian foundation that we have here in the Western world. And so in the 1960s and 70s, Milton Rokeach put together what he called terminal values and instrumental values. Terminal values are end states that we desire, like beauty or peace or wisdom or recognition. And instrumental values are the ways in which we get those terminal values. And so this is his list, right? So we get them by being cheerful or logical or loving or polite or obedient. Some of these terms are a little antiquated, but what this gives you is it gives you an initial scientific foundation at our scientific study for values, right? Values equate to virtues. They also equate to, or they are synonymous with ethics as well. So values, virtues, or even character strengths as well. All right, so this is getting a scientific look at our moral foundation. But I will say that we haven't really gone that far in depth with it. What we see here is Rokeach's values have become part of Schwartz's 10 universal values, and those universal values can be summed up on two ends of two different continuums. One is conservation, or politically we could even see that as more conservative, right, compared to liberals who are more open to experience. So those are two ends of the continuum, and values that are related to that we've studied. And then the other continuum has more to do with kind of Eastern versus Western perspectives. Self-transcendence is more of an Eastern perspective, and you can see those values such as benevolence and universalism that are more related to self-transcendence, or Eastern values that have been studied, again, empirically, compared to self-enhancement values, which include things like achievement and power, right? So, again, benefiting the single individual as opposed to benefiting the masses. So those are some areas that we've studied when we're taking a look at values and morals. And we also know that things like the golden rule also seem to be universal as well. So you can see there that we have different definitions from different individuals and different religious sects. Hinduism, everything you should do, will find in this, do nothing to others that would hurt you if it were done to you. Buddhism, similar concept, do not offend others as you would not want to be offended. Taoism, a similar concept. So these all are related to Eastern religions. The success of your neighbor and their losses will be to you if they were your own. All right, so similar to, their losses should be you should feel about their losses as you would feel similarly to your own. Confucianism. Is there any rule that one should follow all of one's life? Yes, the rule of the gentle goodness. That which we do not wish to be done to us, we do not do to others. And then let's take a look at now more related to Western thought on the same concept. So here we've got Judaism. That which you do not wish for yourself, you shall not wish for your neighbor. This is the whole law. The rest is only commentary. So that is from the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible or the Torah. Christians also believe in the same concept as Jews do, but Christians have a verse that would come from the New Testament: in everything do to others what you would have them do to you, for this sums up the law and the prophets. Islam, none of you shall be true believers unless you wish for your brother the same that you wish for yourself. And then more of what would be called a humanistic perspective, a naturalistic perspective, a similar verse. Do one of the above and live in such a way that you will enrich and not diminish our relatives in the earth family of animals and plants, soil, air, and water. So more of a humanistic perspective. Now, I got this from the internet, so you can take a look at how, and maybe you know more than I do about how spot on some of these verses are, but I do know about the Christian verses and the Jewish versions as well, or verses as well, and those are true to the Pentateuch and also to the and also to the New Testament as well. So we've got this concept of spirituality that seems to also be universal as well in something like the Golden Rule. All right, let's keep moving on because this is getting so long. All right, I should have done this in 2 videos. Oh, I'm sorry I didn't. The rest of them I actually am doing in 2 videos. Now let's just take a quick look at, and you can take a look at this chart where you can see the founder and the year that each of these religions were founded in order to give you just a little bit of a background. But what I'm demonstrating here is that the tenets of these different religions are also similar, such as karma, right? Karma, what you do is going to come back to you as well. Some of these concepts of enlightenment are similar concepts that are related to, for example, the Golden Rule. Now we can see here, when did Judaism come on, when did Christianity come on board, and when did Islam come on board, and then their major head figures or founders, if you would like to say. And then also the biblical content that they have, or biblical basis for those beliefs. So if you are more interested in finding out a little bit more of the details about different religions, or even, coming back to me and, giving me some insight on some of this, that would be wonderful. So we can see, though, that concepts of religion are similar and that they have been around for a very, very long time. So the idea here is, our concepts of spirituality, are they universal? And then we want to kind of study what is the reason for their universality. Darwinists, or those that individuals that buy into Darwinism, would suggest that that it has evolved simply for the benefit of making us feel good. But it seems like there are some really far-reaching tenets that are shared universally, that also we know psychologically have beneficial health outcomes, both mentally and physically. We know that individuals who have spiritual beliefs are better off as far as health goes. So, considering that the beliefs are shared, and very similar beliefs are shared, is there a particular way, as we see the way, when we take a look at, for example, Confucianism, is there a way? And Christians, early Christians, were called the way. So we even begin to see in language and in labels that we have some kind of universal language that's being used, or terminology that is being used. So a shared concepts that we have. And these shared concepts then are important to understanding whether or not there is a universality to this idea that we seek a higher power, and the benefit in seeking a higher power. Again, we need to study this, though, scientifically. Okay, so what I'm asking you to do then is I'm asking you to invest. I'm asking you to invest in the idea that something is greater than our senses and more powerful. I have a picture there of the waterfall that gives us such an image of power, and the energy and force that is behind that waterfall creates stored energy for us. And some of these concepts really that are above and beyond, a lot of the things that we have been putting our mind on, like primitive medicine and getting, primitive ways of getting a disease, instead of taking a look at more holistic and concepts in something that is above and beyond our physical nature. So discover, research and become curious so that we can scientifically examine this really important question. And I'm not quite sure why we would want to abandon and be of this, again, primitive mindset that we abandon questions that have been examined for millennia. All right, now taking a look at more of a Christian approach to a higher power. I just wanted to bring up a couple concepts that I thought were important. And the first concept that is a universal concept that leads to positive outcomes that we see scientifically demonstrated and also related to Western organized religion is this concept of forgiveness and this concept also of grace, for example. And so taking a look at those, what we see from a Christian perspective is that why did Jesus die on the cross? Well, Jesus died on the cross we know, to transform us was one of the reasons why, according to Christians, why Jesus died on the cross. Okay? But a second reason has been given, and that is a reason of grace. And that is that we all have character defects, and that these character defects need grace. And so what is this grace that is sort of a universal concept that is shared among Christians? And again, demonstrating the need for why do we need a higher power? Why do we need to consider this idea of a higher power? Is it beneficial to us? And here I took this quote from Romans chapter 4, verse 25, where it says, "He was delivered over to death for our sins and was raised to life for our justification." And so here we're given a verse that really explains the reason for Jesus' death, and that is for our sins and for our justification. And so I took a look at that a little bit and thought about that. What does that mean, this concept of justification? And if all of us are sinners, right, according to this spiritual concept, no matter whether you're coming from AA or whether or not you're coming from a Native American concept, we can see that we all fall short. The definition of sin, to miss the mark, right? That we all miss the mark. And so when we're talking about justification, what are we talking about? Justification is to make just for our sins, because there are a whole host of things that I have done that needs justice. When I feel that I have to forgive somebody, I have to forgive somebody because of an injustice. When I feel that I am triggered somehow emotionally and have to lash out, that is typically because of an injustice. When I can't feel peace because of what is going on politically or economically or health-wise, it is because I feel there is an injustice. And so what does grace provide? What grace provides is justice for my sins, forgiveness for my sins. And what this brings about is real peace. Because what can I enjoy when there is justice? I can enjoy real peace. And if this really is a feeling that I can enjoy because of my belief and following of a higher power, then I can see why I would remain healthy following this path. Because what I just said is that this path brings about real peace. So of course, if I'm not feeling anxiety because of my economic states, if I'm not feeling anxiety because of the relationships I'm in, if I'm not feeling anxiety because of what tomorrow brings, if I'm not feeling that anxiety, then I'm feeling peace, right? Then I don't have to go after justice. And this is something we really want to contemplate, because if embracing the concept of a higher power makes me feel justified without actually having to seek my own justice, then that's going to bring about a healthy peace, right? A healthy peace that equates to mental and physical health. All right. I think this is my last slide. We'll see. And now, again, back to the Christian concept, because I wanted to show you 3 different ways of that culture considers and supports the concept of transformation. Okay, so Romans chapter 12, verse 2. Now we see again, these are Christian concepts of transformation, which I am taking from the New Testament because it's what I'm most familiar with. All right, so do not conform to these ways, but rather be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And then that scripture goes on to say that we do that by handing our will over. And there's a good reason I didn't want to put the rest of that scripture there, is because there's so much of that individuals don't like to do. We want to make our own way. And this is what we're going to be talking about as we talk about the value of transformation and the spiritual path that we need to go down in order to really experience that transformation, to go between one form to another form, right? And isn't that what we want to do? So let's talk about, just for just a second, today's question. So today's question is I would like to ask you different ways that you might consider how you can, or different ways that you might consider the benefit in having a higher power. And so this might be, discovering, researching, taking a look at some of the things that I've taken a look at, considering how we might be able to approach some of these questions in scientific ways so that we are not continuously going backwards to primitive times with our knowledge. So for today's question, what I want to ask you is, which I haven't had up there for very often, I would like you to think about and consider some of the benefits that you would like to have or experience or see that I've talked about that are promised, transformation, whatever it is, because we are seeking what I believe is innate and in our hearts, is universal, a higher power. Okay. Remember that I need you to subscribe to my videos. I need you to like my videos, give them thumbs up, and most important, please share my videos as well. Okay? This is Dr. Annette Feravich with Healthy Mind, Body, Spirit, and you can find me on the internet at www.healthymindbodyspirit.net. Also, let's take a quick look at what we're going to talk about next week on our agenda, shall we? Oh, you know what I didn't do? And summarize. And I want to summarize because this is actually a really good summary. So let's take a look at what we talked about today that I would like you to consider when you're thinking about today's question. We're going to talk about these sort of two different roads that we can take to transformation. No, two different roads. One of them leads to transformation and one of them simply doesn't. Know that we can take a road to transforming. So, point number one in summary. Point number two, to know more, we need scientific studies that are devoted more than the current narratives. And the current narratives are, right now, traditional medicine is what we're looking at. We need to, and also Darwinism as well. Darwinian theory is the narrative. And what we end up doing then is not understanding areas and places for real hope. If I cannot understand real transformation, then it's easy for me to really lose hope. And then we also talked about the three great examples that I had of transformation, the universality of God that we talked about, as we see in the verses of the wolves within. I also talked about an example of Alcoholics Anonymous and how those promises are promises of real transformation. And then finally, I had concepts such as grace and forgiveness that also contribute to real transformation. So again, this is Dr. Annette Feravich. Thank you for joining me if you join me. And let me tell you that now that it is summertime, you will begin to see all of these videos on podcast, and they will also all be edited for you. And so take a look for my series. All right, that's all that I have for you. Thanks a lot.